Let me introduce our panel members. Today we have with us Jay Harrison of the New York Herald Tribune and Max de Schauensee of the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin. Also an old friend and quiz favorite, the eminent conductor Fausto Cleva. Mr. Cleva is in the middle of an unusually heavy 48-hour schedule. He conducted Manon Lescaut last night, and tonight he is going to conduct the season's first performance of Don Carlo. Our fourth guest is Robert Herman, who is making his quiz debut this afternoon. This is Mr. Herman's first season as artistic administrator of the Metropolitan. Although he's been with the company for 5 years in a variety of very responsible jobs, as assistant stage manager, assistant stage director, assistant to the artistic administrator, and acting business administrator. Mr. Herman is the son of a former idol of American baseball, Babe Herman, one of the great outfielders and batters of the Brooklyn Dodgers. And you remember in one season, 1930, Babe Herman's batting average reached .393. Mr. Herman, I must say I feel a little funny referring to your father as Babe. There's no disrespect intended, you know. Mr. Herman, you grew up in a very glamorous world of baseball. How did you happen to find your way into the world of opera?
Well, that switch was made many, many years ago. When I was in junior high school at the age of 14, I started growing, as young people will, like a weed, and my heart couldn't quite keep up with it, so I had to give up my physical education for a short while. At that time, I had the choice of following either art or music appreciation. I took music, and here I am.
Well, I think your heart did very well by us.
I'm awfully happy it did, too.
Well, gentlemen, we're going to depart today a little bit from our usual quiz procedure, and we'll have an entirely musical quiz. Each question is going to have its own particular topic or theme, and each question will include one excerpt from today's opera, which is Wozzeck. Mr. Jan Beyer, an assistant conductor of the Metropolitan, is at the Knabe to play all the excerpts for us. And we're going to ask you to name the opera, name the characters involved, and describe the general dramatic situation. And all of this music, you'll find, is vividly descriptive, and it may give us some very interesting comparisons because we've chosen our selections from almost 2 centuries of operatic music. And here's our first question, which comes to us from Ruth Liebeck of Ormond Beach, Florida. It's about stage props, but not just ordinary stage props. These are things that lend a special character or atmosphere to the scene. And the orchestra describes very vividly these props as they're used on stage or the action involving the props. And we want you to name the opera and tell us what's happening and the characters involved. So, Mr. Beyer, will you play the first one for us, please? Now, all the hands went up. I think Mr. Herman's was first.
Well, that's the very end of Rosenkavalier, when the little lackey comes back to find the handkerchief that's been dropped by the Marshal as she exited.
Yes, yes. And it doesn't really have anything strictly to do with the plot, does it? But it lends a special note to it seems to me.
Oh, it's a wonderful close.
That's right. No, I mean... strange and humorous and light touch after all the sentiment's gone before. Well, now we have another, quite a different kind of prop this time. See if you can tell where this one comes from. Mr. Beyer? Those bump, bump, all the hands were up, but I think Mr. Harrison's was first. Mr. Harrison.
Well, the prop is a very unusual one in a very unusual opera. It's the hobby horse in the concluding scene of Wozzeck today. You want me to describe the scene? Because it's incredible. I mean, I think it's one of the most incredible scenes, one of the most incredible operas of our time. A bunch of children are around Wozzeck and Marie's child, and they yell out at him, "Hey there, your mother is dead." And it doesn't penetrate, it doesn't get to him. And he keeps playing with this hobby horse, singing hip, hop, and they all decide to go off and see the bloody body of the mother. And again, the child, hip, hop, just doesn't come across. And with this, he walks off the stage and the curtain comes down. It's chill-making, believe me.
And the way that scene begins with all the children playing
Ring Around Rosie.
As they say.
You know, it's one of the great scenes. It's very short, to the point, just children on the stage.
It's marvelous. And now we have still another prop. Mr. Bear, will you play this one for us? Again, all the hands, but this time I think Mr. Cleva was first.
That is El Tabarro from Puccini, and this is the little organ play on the stage, and the occasion is that the tenor asked this so-called professor of the organette to play a little waltz that he made dance with Michele's wife.
Yes.
Is that in the orchestra or is that played on stage?
No, it's on the orchestra.
Yes.
Ah, that's in the orchestra itself.
Yes, when
Woodwind in the
I
orchestra.
see.
Yes.
and they give this nice little out-of-tune effect, which suggests the barrel organ so nicely. All right, now we have another question here, which comes to us from Margaret Rauner of Forest Hills, Long Island. And this one is about hallucinations. These are operatic characters who are seeing things. They see things or people or events that actually aren't there at all. And they're probably obsessed, most of these people. Again, very descriptive music and a highly dramatic scene. Mr. Bear, will you give us the first one? Yes, Mr. Herman.
Well, this is the famous clock scene at the end of the second act of Boris Godunov, where Boris, seeing the clock glowing and striking in the corner, thinks he sees the little child, the dead Tsarevich, whom he has had murdered, coming back to haunt him.
Yes,
it's a very chilling moment.
His guilty conscience
Yes.
conjuring up this figure in front of
Pleasant
him.
quiz we have today.
It's a pleasant opera we have today.
Well, now, Mr. Bear, play us the next hallucination, if you will.
Fire.
Mr. de Schauensee.
I imagine that's from Wozzeck.
It is.
And, I think it's where Wozzeck sees the sun going down and thinks that the world is on fire.
Yes, indeed. And it's a very red sunset, and he's already upset. And all right, now we have another hallucination. Mr. Cleva.
I think this is Macbeth.
It certainly is
Where
Macbeth.
they went in the second act, when Macbeth imagined to see the Banco ghost, or the
Yes.
dagger that killed Banco better.
Yes. Is this a dagger I see before me, that whole scene? Now, our next one comes to us from Nancy Smith of Concord, New Hampshire. And this one is about operatic kisses. And not the ordinary garden variety of kisses in the standard operatic love duet. These kisses come at dramatically extremely tense moments. And they are important even to the point of life and death. Now, let's have our first one, Mr. Bear. I wish you could see the looks of puzzlement and then smiles coming. Mr. Harrison?
That's Wozzeck, too.
That's also Wozzeck.
This is the kiss. It's lovely. This is the kiss before he cuts her throat. This is it actually
This
is
is
that's
that.
the way it goes. I mean,
That's
But
right.
they did it.
Wasn't that the B natural that was trilling at the top that runs through that entire scene? Yes, that's
It is, exactly. Beautiful observation. Now, there is something special behind this, a special significance to this kiss, gentlemen. See if you can tell us what it is. Mr. Bear? Yes, Mr. de Schauensee.
Well, that's from Tristan and Isolde,
It is indeed.
which means the kiss, which is love, and of course is going to lead to death.
That's right. That's even more specific, though. This is a kiss at a special moment, a dramatic moment at the end of the second act. Tristan.
Oh yes, when Melot points out to King Mark Tristan, and he turns to Isolde and kisses her in front of King Mark,
Yes.
precipitates the duel.
Yes, and before he kisses her, he says, "Will you follow me to the land
Yes.
where I am going
Yes.
now?" And in words that only she understands, indicates that he is going to die, and
Yes.
will she follow him? Now, here's another death kiss, Mr. Bayer. Oh, there's a look of enthusiastic recognition on Mr. Cleva's face.
That is the law of Trichim by Montemezzi, and it happened in the third act when Avito kissed the lips of Fiora that is lying dead, and the lips of Fiora have been poisoned by Avito's father because he wanted to find out who was a Flora lover. Instead, later on, also his son will kiss that lips, and they will happy die altogether.
That's a very unusual kiss.
All right. Now, our next one comes to us from Mrs. I.A. Landsman of Brooklyn, New York. And you know, gentlemen, that much of the score of Wozzeck is written in strict musical forms, and so we've selected three of them, the Passacaglia, the Fugue, and the Rondo. And Mr. Bayer is going to play you first an excerpt from Wozzeck, and we'll ask you to tell us what scene that comes from. And then he will play you an example of that same musical form as it's used in one of the great classics of opera. And we'll start first with the Passacaglia. Mr. Bayer, will you... Mr. Herman.
This is the introduction to the fourth scene of the first act, if I'm not mistaken. It's the scene in the doctor's room. Each of the first 5 scenes of Wozzeck is supposed to be a character study, and this Passacaglia, which is 21 variations on this theme, represents the doctor in the story. It's very clinical, very scientific, very cold, and it expresses the doctor's character in that sense.
Yes, you've described the scene perfectly. It's actually, I think, the third scene, but that's not so very important. It represents...
I'll argue with that, I think. It's number 4.
I bow to you. Now we'll have a Passacaglia from another opera. Yes, Mr. Harrison.
That's the great last aria in Dido and Aeneas, When I Am Laid in Earth. And it continues, that particular basso ostinato continues that. The whole thing is by Purcell.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great, great number.
Oh, yes, one of the
Sung
great...
by Dido.
By Dido herself. She... Yes. All right, now we have another one. This time we have a fugue. And the first here is the fugue from Wozzeck.
Falling on her knees before him and weeping, she kissed his feet and washed them.
Yes, Mr. de Schauensee.
Well, that's obviously involved with Marie.
Quite right.
Is it a scene where she's reading from the scriptures?
It is. It's the scene where she reads from the scriptures about Mary Magdalene. And I wish we had time to go on with others of the forms, but as you hear, there are the chimes, which are a signal from backstage that the curtain is about ready to go up on the last act of Wozzeck. So thank you very much, Mr. Harrison, Mr. de Schauensee, Mr. Herman, and Mr. Cleva. This is Edward Downs, inviting you to be with us again next week for the broadcast of Mussorgsky's Boris Godunov and another session of Texaco's Opera Quiz.